Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of Specimens. My name is Elle and I am the host of this podcast where we talk all things specimens. If you haven't been here before, I'm just going to quickly run down what it is that we do here. I speak with the stewards of conservation about their hard work, very often behind the scenes, working underrepresented roles in science. If that sounds like something you're interested in, stick around because we've got a fantastic guest today. I'm really excited to bring you Sophie Pavelle, author and science communicator. You are going to fall in love with her. She's just a national treasure, I'm calling it now. She's so easy to speak to. She's so passionate, but in a way that's relatable. She's one of the most genuine people I think I've ever spoken with. I feel like Sophie is the big sister nature communicator that we all need right now. So allow yourself to be comforted. Here's Sophie Pavelle. Sophie, I'm thrilled to be speaking with you. Thank you so much for being here. How are you and where are you at the moment?
Oh, good morning. Well, it's so fun to be here. I've been following your podcast for a while and I was thrilled to be able to be on it and to be asked. So thank you so much for having me. I am talking to you from my office in Exeter in Devon, which is a rarity at the moment because I seem to be all over the place. So it's actually lovely to be home doing this.
Well, Sophie, you can tell me about all the things that have been taking you all over the country and beyond in a little bit. But before we do that, what I love to do with my guests on this show is sort of go right back to the beginning. So tell me a little bit about when you grew up and what the world looked like from young Sophie's eyes.
Well, I was actually born in America. I was born in Augusta, Georgia, in the Deep South. I had a proper Southern hillbilly accent. Which I kind of miss actually. And my dad was in the US Navy, and so that's why he's American anyway. So that's why we were there. But we spent a very short amount of time there, really. And then the plan, I think, with both of my parents, who are very outdoorsy, adventurous, and just wanted us to have as much opportunity as we could when we were younger, growing up, as I think any parent does. Neither wanted to move to, well, they wanted us to grow up in England. And so we were in a fortunate position that basically, I think, from what they've told me, they basically looked at the map of England and thought, well, where would be a great place to live? And so they landed in the southwest in lovely Devon, and we've never moved since. So I grew up in a place called Lympstone, which is right on the River Exe. And we were very lucky. We lived in this tiny, tiny rented apartment. But the amazing thing was, that was just priceless, is that it was actually on the beach in the estuary, on the Exe estuary, which is world renowned for its bird life and its mud flats and its wildlife and everything. And so that was my introduction from suburban deep south USA to sleepy Lympstone in East Devon. And then ever since then, I think I had no choice but to kind of be outside and explore. We didn't have much money. We never went on holiday. And if we did, it was just camping in the local area. And so I think the idea of making the most of what's on your doorstep just was so normalized to me growing up. And so I didn't really know any different. And I think it's only now being older that I've realized just how formative those years were in shaping my priorities, my passions, my interests, my perspective on things. So I'd like to think that actually young me is very similar to how I am now, curious, wanting to be outside, don't really care about what the weather's doing, and just kind of a burning kind of craving to just sort of move and be alongside natural spaces and landscapes and that sort of thing.
So if I'm getting the impression from that beautiful storytelling of your past, that the natural world has always been intrinsic to you, it's always felt as so a natural calling. But was there ever a period in your life where that love and that craving, to use your word, was sidelined and maybe you had to prioritize academia, or you saw that your kind of love for the natural world was buried in some way?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think this is a trend that is common to so many young people. I think by our very nature, when we're young, we're fascinated with the natural world. We're so up for it. Our appetite is enormous for it because we haven't had the world influence us yet. Our lives are very simple and pure. We just have very basic kind of fundamental human needs, one of which is just to explore nature and explore the world around us and to learn from that. But then I think as we start to enter into the world a little bit with school, studying, university, friendship groups, growing up, life gets a bit busier. And I think nature naturally gets sidelined because I certainly felt that being interested in nature and the outdoors, I was never really that vocal about it. It was just something I did on the weekends. And so I think it was only when it started to not be a part of my life, when I went to Bristol University, which was amazing, but suddenly not having Dartmoor on my doorstep and the sea on my doorstep, and to live in a busy city was quite overwhelming for me. And so naturally I started to explore, well, how can I meet my need for this through societies and stuff. So I experimented with joining like the Mountaineering Society and kind of hiking stuff and outdoorsy things. But then I had quite major knee surgery throughout university. So actually I spent most of my time on crutches, not unable to do anything active, like the girl on crutches. And so that was difficult, because suddenly I went from being able to have freedom in my body and my time to do what I wanted and to get out of the city when I needed to suddenly being quite completely immobile, actually, for a few months, and wheelchair bound for a little bit. And so suddenly having that taken away from me, I realized, oh, well, it's reflecting. I think I was really quite unhappy and anxious, and I felt like it wasn't cool to be interested in hiking and that sort of thing. So I just confined those interests to doing with my dad and my brother. And then luckily, very fortunate that my boyfriend is into all that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's definitely a period throughout university where just life was busy, going out, drinking, worrying about what's next, and being outdoorsy and adventurous definitely wasn't part of that, wasn't a priority then, but it certainly has been a priority to claw back during my 20s, for sure.
Never has a truer word been spoken than you clawing back that love for the natural world. So if you did touch on your academic journey, and you mentioned you went to Bristol University, what did you intend for yourself as an end goal of university? Was there some relativity to the natural world in your choice of academic pursuits?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I always knew that I wanted to do something animal related, but I was very much, my head was all over the place. I had no idea what to do. And I think I was starting to get really sick of people telling me that it was, what a blessing. You don't know what to do with such freedom, because I needed some direction. I needed some focus. And I really envied those people who had a really clear idea of their skill set, their strengths, and where that would take them. And so I dipped my toe into all kinds of work experience. I was very interested in veterinary medicine. And so I was kind of looking at doing an accelerated veterinary medicine course, did all the work experience, spent, weeks in Bristol Veterinary Hospital doing surgery experience and stuff, which I loved. But then it was kind of just like, oh, but do I want to spend so many more years at uni?
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, maybe physio, because that's kind of similar, but then shorter. And then I thought, well, a lot of my family have been in the military, so let's try out for that. And I kind of still love the idea of that in a way, but I wasn't medically fit because of my knee surgery and everything. So I was kind of here, there, and everywhere, and didn't really have a direction. But I think there was a undercurrent of, I want to do something different, and I want it to push me into the outdoors and to be something to do with nature, whatever that looks like. But at school, I was always taught that, well, not taught, but we always had the image of jobs in conservation and wildlife were voluntary and something lovely to do in your spare time, not something that could be a lucrative, viable vocation, and an important one as well. And so that's why I studied zoology, because it was broad enough to give me options after. But in truth, I kind of, it's only in the last 2 years since actually working in conservation and having that job opportunity, as a result of perhaps lots of volunteering and networking and work experience, that I've been more confident that actually my career will be in conservation, because I was working in retail right up until lockdown. So yeah, it's been a roller coaster.
Oh, it sounds really interesting, and it kind of leads me to touch on a pattern that I see in a lot of the people that I speak to for this podcast who kind of join science from an unconventional route. But that's in relation to your book, which I'd love to give you the opportunity to contextualize first before I ask that. So tell me a little bit, I'll let you explain, when did the idea for that sort of come into your life? When was that moment of inception where you thought, this is something I really feel strongly about, and I'm now going to move from a life in retail to becoming an author?
Well, the short answer is that it was never part of the plan. Writing a book was, if you had said that this was going to be what I was up to 5 years ago, I would not have believed it. And I know that sounds really cliche, but literally I was not gunning for this opportunity at all. It happened by total chance. So writing is something that I've always enjoyed doing. I did English A-level and have always written, but more from like a just documenting life standpoint. So I've always kept a journal on and off. I have periods where it's really busy, periods where I forget it for a few months. You know, ever since I was about 5 years old, I would document things and just document life and report just everyday mundane things. Almost, I remember being so young and already thinking, I'm going to really enjoy looking back at this when I'm older. And I have kept all of them. And it is such a joy to look back because you capture moments in your life which, like going for dinner, or like, what am I wearing today? Or what game did we play? And who was my partner in the school trip to the church? I don't know. But things that just are impossible to reflect on in your memory or in photographs because writing is so intimate. And so it had been, I guess, an outlet for me to express myself and just to get thoughts out of my head ever since a really, really young age. And it was a practice that I enjoyed honing after I did a master's in science communication. We did a writing science module. And I loved the challenge of partnering my love of English and writing with science and thinking, okay, well, here's a complex topic. How can we reword this so that it's powerful for someone who's not interested in nature or science, is relevant to them? So I enjoyed that problem solving. And it was a skill that I was surprised to discover. So I'm always, I don't know if you can relate to this, but I've always been very good at identifying my weaknesses, but terrible at admitting strengths. And I'm still working on that. And so
Totally.
yeah,
Absolutely.
it's just, I don't know what it is, but we need to get better at it. But essentially I was given an opportunity. I was volunteering for the RSPB. The State of Nature report came out, which is a big report that basically every 3 years summarizes statistics, findings, predictions, what's going on with nature in the UK, what's being done to help it, and what challenges remain. And so I was given an opportunity to write an article for the Metro, which is like a kind of tabloid, popular daily newspaper. And it was it was my first kind of opportunity to test my science communication skills of how can we get this rather dull, dense report into the public domain in a way that impacts them. And the next day I got an email, and I was on my lunch break in the shop at the time. And it was from a publisher who wasn't Bloomsbury, is a competitor of Bloomsbury. And they basically said, we love the article. We love the way you write about nature. It's quite unusual. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, sorry, I think you've got the wrong email here, because yes, that is my name on the article. But, you know, a book is just like, what a stupid idea. Anyway, so I completely proceeded to rip my article to shreds in front of a publisher and discredit what I'd done. Say, yes, that's my name, but no, you know, who do you think I am? I'm not good enough to even consider this. Because I thought people who write books are of a certain age and certain stature, and let alone books about nature. Sure. You know, natural history is such a revered kind of huge genre to enter into. But anyway, the seed was sown. And I thought, well, let's play along. If I had to write a book, what would it be about? And the idea for Forget Me Not, which is essentially a kind of, again, this sounds really cliche, but it's my love letter to the whole kind of the emotion of just getting out into nature and making it your own, and using that as a vehicle to spread messages about things that are in danger of being forgotten and becoming extinct. And the kind of the joy of just throwing yourself into something without really having a plan and just seeing what comes out of it, but it being purposeful in terms of having an ultimate goal of more people need to know about this, and I'm going to try and be that storyteller. So that came, I think, had been sown when I was doing my master's dissertation, which was a 3-week trek around the coast of Cornwall. Basically doing that, you know, saying, hey, look, we have gannets here in the UK. They're the largest seabird in Europe. Who knew? I didn't know that. I didn't learn that in zoology. So I think the seed had been sown for that then. And so the idea actually came very organically and naturally and quite quickly. Once I started to really put it down onto paper and handwrite it, I thought, actually, gosh, I had no idea this was in my brain. It's kind of all spilling out. So the idea that I proposed then is pretty much the idea of forget-me-not. They didn't end up wanting it. And so then a friend was like, well, don't, despair, see if someone else wants it. And Bloomsbury did, which I'm very grateful for. So yeah, it had, just the way life works. I don't think I ever would have written a book had the idea not been provoked by someone else.
Well, Sophie, it's really interesting listening to you speak, because I think we've kind of skirted around it objectively, but you're very quick to discredit yourself and minimize your achievements. And I think that is, like I said prior to the previous question, something that I see a lot in guests that have reached science through perhaps an unconventional or quote unquote professional or academic way. And I wondered if you would feel comfortable exploring what I know you voiced as imposter syndrome, how it comes up for you, and also how you overcome this now as a published author, and also through the process of writing. Did that come up a lot for you?
Yeah, it's a topic that I'm increasingly really passionate about, because the more I talk about it, not only does that help me, recognize it, validate it, and then hopefully rise above it, the more I realize that so many people who have achieved incredible things, and men. There are so many young men who feel imposter syndrome, which I think is not spoken about very much. And it's surprising to me, but it's also not surprising, because I think we live in a culture where still you look at science as this kind of, oh, wow, you must be an incredible person, a hero. If scientists, engineers, doctors historically are like revered as like the heroes of society, the problem solvers, the geniuses, the leaders. So I still think ingrained we have a fear of not living up to that label that we have as humans created. And I work a lot. I've been fortunate enough recently to work a lot with schools and students in their late teens, and also students at university. And so many of them want to talk about this, which is amazing. But it also makes me feel sad, because here are these young people who have everything ahead of them. They have so much going for them. And yet at school, they are feeling those emotions of, I'm not good enough. I shouldn't be here. I'm a fraud. And I feel that too. And obviously entering it, being given permission by a massive publisher like Bloomsbury to write a book on climate change. And at the time I was 25, so I'm 27 now. I found it it was hugely exciting, but hugely responsible task. And I felt burdened with the responsibility of basically communicating all these massive messages. And I think I'm kind of proud to be, but then also again intimidated by the fact I'm one of the youngest authors in the space talking about this. So I kind of feel, in lots of interviews they said, oh, you are the voice of the millennials in this story. And again, I feel like, oh my gosh, weight on my shoulders. But I think, I felt when I was writing, I suddenly thought, well, I've got to write like the others. I've got to write from a position of authority, and I've got to assert myself in wordplay. And I was finding it really difficult. And I remember my English teacher saying, if you're finding writing difficult, writing should be a joy, and I find it a joy. Yeah. But if I'm finding it really difficult and I just can't get through a paragraph or a sentence, I'm almost trying too hard. And my editor gave me such amazing advice. And she was like, how would you say it to me? If we were having a beer, how would you just say it to me? Just explain it. And so once I almost took the pressure off and thought, well, oh, maybe my voice does matter. Maybe I should explore and see what happens when I just say it how I think. It then suddenly became a lot easier and more fun and enjoyable. And it was the classic thing of writing without fear. And I actually wrote that on a Post-it note, which I still have on my laptop. It's all frayed and stuff because it's like 2.5 years old. But it just says, in my writing, in capitals, messy writing, write without fear. Because it was, imposter syndrome is fear. And we can do so much. We can do more than we ever think we could if we do stuff without fear. And if we just call it out and say, okay, that's an emotion, but let's park it. Let's rise above it.
Yeah.
And so it's a work in progress. And I go into situations like big literary festivals where I meet, this weekend I was at Kendall Mountain Festival, which was amazing. Brushing shoulders with George Monbiot, Rob McFarlane, Amy Jane Beer, Guy Shrubsole. Legends, absolute legends. And the whole thing I was just trying to say to myself throughout in my head was, without fear, do it without fear. You have a right to be here. You've earned your position here. But it's a work in progress. But so many people feel it.
Yeah, and Sophie, it speaks a little bit to the tone of your book, which I have to say is so beautifully intimate. And one of the things that you talked about earlier at the top of the conversation was, I think you actually used the word intimate when you were discussing journaling as a 5-year-old. There is something that's very cohesive and intrinsic. The way that you're talking in the book, that tone that you use, it's informal. It's like hanging out with a mate. And I think that is a really beautiful thing, because it allows people like next generations to connect to that kind of language, because there is that fear of the science language being quite intimidating and overwhelming. When you were writing, how did you balance the right amount of science to this casual tone? Were you very conscious of trying to create light and shade, or was it just kind of came to you really naturally?
A bit of both, I think. I think once I gave myself permission to use my voice after my editor's advice, I think it did end up coming quite naturally, because it was kind of it was kind of part of me trying to unpick these massive topics and help. It was part of my understanding. So sometimes when I read stuff back, I think, I can see my understanding growing. So it's almost me not offloading, but kind of, I had to really unpick and dissect these big topics so that I could understand them. And I think in doing so, it naturally comes across as an easier way to digest these subjects. But it was something that I was conscious of, and it was definitely a practice. Once I found my voice, chapter by chapter, they got easier. And so then I would go back and think, well, let's tease that out a little bit more, so it kind of becomes a consistent narrative throughout. So I really enjoyed, again, it was like a problem-solving exercise, but I love the way that you describe the light and shade, because that is exactly the approach that I wanted, is that I wanted to intersperse dark with light. And I didn't want to sugarcoat grim truths, because we need to face right up to those, because they're real. But I wanted to present them in a way that was just okay, this is the situation, this is what's happening, just digest it a little bit, but I'm going to let you sit with that for a bit whilst we carry on with the journey and get back on the bike, get back on the train. What's going on in the nature, in the immediate surroundings? What am I eating at the moment? Have I fallen into a head? And so I really wanted, and it kind of helped me as well, because I didn't want to get bogged down in writing pages and pages about green energy paradoxes with cetaceans. And so I thought, well, actually, I'm going to go down a dark alley here if I don't come out and add a bit of light in and characterize and add some humanity back into these stories, which are so often utterly detached from the personable nature and the intimacy of these situations which wildlife and nature and landscapes in Britain are facing.
Yeah. And I mean, did you find at any point you were able to shift into a more optimistic mindset, having had the book published, knowing that it's out there? Does it help you with any kind of eco-anxiety related issues that you might have been dealing with through the process of writing the book?
Yeah, it does. And it's actually, I'd always kind of mused or sort of part of the motivation to get through the writing, and it's an ultra marathon, the whole process. It's exhausting and it's relentless, and you utterly give your whole self to this project, which is what makes it really rewarding. But it was always kind of my climate action in a way. I thought, I've been given this amazing opportunity and I need to do the best I can with it so that it can I wanted the book to be a torchbearer for not only these 10 species that I spotlight, but then also the amazing scientists I was lucky enough to speak to, and their amazing work and their projects and what they represent and where they're going with it. And so I think the book surprised me in terms of how popular it's becoming. I was not expecting that at all. But then also, no, genuinely, I wasn't. It's kind of crazy, but it really has helped ease feelings of anxiety, because the classic question that everyone asks is, well, what can I do? How can I help? And writing a book is fairly unrelatable, but I think it was just, what is relatable is the conversation that is within each chapter in terms of voicing concerns, getting out into nature, which anyone can do from their doorstep, talking about what you're worried about, what you're hopeful for. And then I think having the opportunity to remind myself and look for stories of hope and positivity, like Project Seagrass, and being able to spotlight scientists and open my eyes to amazing work that is being done, amazing solutions that are being found, to remind ourselves that there are scientists dedicating their entire careers to finding solutions to these big problems, but it's not portrayed in the media, because the media wants jeopardy, drama, sensationalism. That is not necessarily what fits with science at the moment. And so there's a skew towards negative stories always in the news at the moment, which is why it's very overwhelming and consuming. And so to be able to try and think, to have the opportunity to say, actually, here's what's going on and let's be hopeful about it. Yes, there's some issues, but look at the amazing, clever, intelligent people who are sorting it out and are working on these problems. So it was so hopeful to have a reminder of that. And so whenever I get a little bit eco-anxious, I think, well, actually, I remember that the Project Seagrass was like a long-term project, and that's happening now. They're working on that right now. Yeah. So it's not like people are sat around twiddling their thumbs. Scientists are, that's their job. And so it was, it does ease eco-anxiety for sure, knowing that.
And just to that point, have you spoken, you said you went into going to schools and you speak with a lot of young adults and children. Have you seen shifts in their overall mindset? I know that children have a hard time dealing with the overwhelming and frankly very scary concept that they have to grasp, and that sense of responsibility. Do you see positivity when you speak with the children?
I do. I mean, gosh, if you're ever looking to feel reignited with a fire and a hope for the natural world, just go hang out with students. They're amazing. Oh my gosh. Not only do they ask the best questions, because they're just so blunt and to the point, and so honest. And that's what is so lacking at the moment, is just straight, honest answers, straight, honest thinking. But they are so fired up about the natural world. Yes, they're concerned, but because they're energetic and they're young and they're excited about, the fact that they could choose a degree or they could choose a vocation or a hobby that kind of helps them learn more about nature. And I think suddenly nature's becoming cooler because it's current, and that's hugely down to Greta and Extinction Rebellion and school strikes and social media and the kind of rallying outcry among the next generation for wanting a very valid say in the decisions that are going to affect their future and their lives. And so just hanging out with them and chatting is so inspiring, and it's such a great leveler, because we don't necessarily have the same things in life going on because we're different ages, but we all have the same concerns. We can all speak to the same points.
Yeah.
So yes, they're concerned, but they're fired up and they want to do something about it. And I think I'd be really interested to see whether there is an uptake in natural sciences degrees and conservation degrees. I think I read somewhere, or someone told me the other day, that there's an uptake in like environmental policy masters and kind of governance things. So to see young people being politically engaged and recognizing that they have to be politically engaged if they want the environment to have a hopeful future is very, very cool. And I also think teachers I've met loads of teachers who are suddenly coming around to the fact that they need to get this kind of stuff in their curriculum. And so that's really inspiring as well, because teachers are responsible for bringing up the next generation largely. And so if we can get them engaged and fired up and inspired, that's going to really drip down in a beautiful way to the students that they're teaching.
Yeah, totally. I think, Sophie, you do it so well. I wonder if you could speak to any experience that you might have had, whether positive or negative, about being a woman in a field that is historically, and as you said before, it's the field of science can be revered in a way that feels very male dominated, very historic, and maybe, you know, not very progressive. So have you experienced any issues in that department?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I've had a really positive experience being a woman in science. I've been lucky that throughout my degrees and at work now, I'm exposed to some incredible examples of female leadership in the conservation space. And actually, there are a lot of women in conservation. And I've had really interesting discussions with some male friends of mine saying, actually, well, there aren't that many young male role models in the conservation space. There's a lot of women, which is brilliant. But actually, if we're looking for millennial men, 20s and 30s, late teens, 20s, 30s, who are really holding the torch for nature, conservation, climate change, I could name probably 5. I could name way more women. And so that's interesting to me. But in terms of being a woman in science, I think I have experienced kind of the classic, especially when I was interviewing for lots of jobs. So before I got my job at Beaver Trust, I interviewed for about 25, I think, jobs in conservation. I knew I wanted to work for an NGO, for a charity. And I interviewed. And each interview was getting less and less kind of what I wanted to do. I was just so desperate to get a foot in the door. And, you know, I've had comments, especially when there's men on the interview panel and ad hoc stuff of, you know, oh, you're a bit glamorous to be in conservation. And I was like, well, I've worn makeup for an interview, if that's what you're asking. I'm trying to, you know, dress for the times, and this is just what I want to do. Or like, just kind of...
Also none of your business.
I know,
Totally not
and
relevant.
totally unrelated and not relevant. You've like totally ignored everything I've said and prepared for in this interview.
Yeah.
Experience, and you just want to comment on image. And I know a lot of people who've had a similar experience of like, oh, you know, sure you want to get your fingernails dirty? It's like, oh, please.
Unreal.
And, you know, other comments, just kind of mainly image related, or sometimes I've been on panels for webinars and discussions where I know I'm the token girl, and it's not, you know, I'm not even representative really of diversity. That's not my conversation, and that's not my baton to hold, because there's so much work that needs to be done there, my goodness. But I've been on, and quite recently, earlier this year, on a panel with all older white men, and I'm the token girl. And I've questioned sometimes my participation. I've refused to be on some panels because I know I'm not the right person to voice whatever the discussion is. I know I'm not the best representative, and I've recommended better people. But I don't know if it's because I look a certain way or something, or I don't know, that they had a different agenda, basically. So that's been irritating. But I think on the whole, I've had such a positive experience, and I've had amazing role models. And I think the conversation is swinging in favor of inclusion and celebrating women in these roles. And it's amazing to see some, you know, many men actually taking to social media or just in conversations saying, oh, you must talk to her. She is the best person for this. And it was just so wonderful that all the experts I sought to supplement knowledge in the book just so happened to be many women, and many of them young. And I never set out, I sort of secretly hoped like, oh, I'd love to get loads of women in here. But I just wanted the best person for the job. I wanted the right voice, the right expert. What was amazing is that sometimes I approached a man who I assumed to be the expert, professor, whatever, and he would say, no, you must speak to Elizabeth Masden. She is the person to speak to on seabirds and green energy. Or you must speak to this person who's just studying her master's. And so it was so exciting to not only see men recommending their female colleagues as the expert, also just so happened for there to be, and I've loved receiving messages about the book being like, oh, it's so inspiring to see so many women in here who are experts and who are the voice of knowledge on a particular topic. So I think we're heading in the right direction, but there's always more work to be done.
Absolutely. Sophie, you have so many other roles that I haven't even given you an opportunity to speak about. I'm very conscious of the time, but I would love if you could let us know what the future looks like for you. Is there any huge ambitions or great dreams that you're yet to realize, whether it's personal or for the natural world?
That's a lovely question. Thank you. Well, writing a book was never part of the plan. It's just a chapter I seem to be in at the moment. And so I don't really know what the next chapter is. I do miss the pure writing phase. It's very private. I'm an introvert naturally. And so the lifestyle of writing suits me well. But I think there's a lot more I want to learn in conservation. And so I'd love to stay working for Beaver Trust as long as I can in communications, where it's such a fascinating time in beaver restoration and their reintroduction at the moment. And so I learn so much from my job there, and I enjoy the challenge and the stimulation of that. It's very busy and it's difficult to juggle with book stuff. And so I find I spread myself quite thin. But yeah, I'd love to stay working in conservation. I think the UK is at an incredible turning point, and the decisions that we make really do well, it'll be kind of make or break for our natural world at the moment if we're not careful. So yeah, I think staying in conservation, I'd love to do more writing, and I think also teasing out the adventure. It's kind of low carbon adventure space is something I'm really keen on, because I love expedition. I love pushing myself physically. I love being physically strong, because I think that helps me be mentally strong. And I love the community of that pursuit. There's an amazing outdoors adventure community here. And I want to try and make that I want that to be as inclusive as possible, and for everybody, every young person, to feel that they can push themselves physically, and to not feel like the kind of what is often perceived on social media as like the cliquey, indulgent adventure outdoor space.
Yeah.
I want it to feel like it's utterly for them, and that they are so welcome there. So there's a lot that I want to do to try and promote that message, and for that to be an amazing way to get into nature in your own way too.
Sophie, I think you are the most remarkable barbell between science and society. You're the voice between the two. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait to see what you go on to do. Thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I've really loved it.
An enormous thank you to Sophie for giving up her time so generously to speak with me for the podcast. I think that conversation was so useful and meaningful, and hopefully that will ease so many people listening. I didn't want that conversation to end. I could listen to Sophie talk for hours. If you feel the same way, then that doesn't have to be the last of Sophie that you hear. You can find her on all of the socials. I'm going to run through those links now. Don't forget, everything is attached to the episode in the show notes. So check it out, have a little scroll, find her and follow her. Her website is sophiepavelle.com. Her Instagram is at SophiePavs, that's Pavs. She's also at that same handle on Twitter, Sophie Pavs. If you'd like to support her by purchasing her book, you can find it on Audible, or if you'd like to support a more independent seller, then there are links in the show notes to places like the RSPB and Waterstones. I think it's really easy to get caught up in the momentum of what the media puts out around the climate crisis, but hopefully these conversations are instilling some hope. The whole reason that I started this project at the very beginning was because I felt really passionate about the conversations around science and the work that people are doing, not just day to day, but to inform such a bigger picture that's going to help save all of us and the specimens that walk this earth. Let's work together, share these conversations, give these people the visibility, and hopefully we can inspire more people to do more about our beautiful planet. Next month's episode is already recorded and edited. It's locked and loaded and ready to go. I speak with botanist Leif Bursweden about incredible plant behavior and the strange things that they do. He's going to shine a light on the wonderful species right beneath our noses. So stay tuned for that. I'll speak with you soon.